800,000. Let that sink in for a second. That staggering number represents the amount of Windows users who just abandoned ship for a single, free, and open-source Linux operating system called Zorin OS. And this didn't happen slowly over a decade. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a sudden wave. What exactly pushes nearly 1 million people to ditch an operating system they've used their entire lives?
For decades, Windows had something way more powerful than just love. It had trust. You bought a PC, it had Windows, and it just worked.
But the clock is officially ticking right now. When Windows 11 arrived, perfectly functioning computers were suddenly declared incompatible. Why? Well, because of TPM 2.0 chips and highly specific CPU requirements. Our sources note that this wasn't really a technical limitation about performance, it was really more of a policy decision disguised as a system requirement. So millions of fast, capable machines that ran Windows 10 flawlessly were suddenly labeled unsupported. And that leads us straight to the absolute cliff edge of October 2025.
With that October 2025 deadline looming, the clock runs out for Windows 10. No more free updates, no more protection. Users are suddenly backed into a corner, facing a brutal dilemma. Buy a completely new computer, literally tossing your perfectly good PC into the e-waste heap, pay Microsoft for extended support, or stay on an unsupported OS and just invite the hackers right in. I mean, we all know the frustration of Windows forcing a massive update right in the middle of a presentation, but forcing you to buy a whole new laptop? That is a whole new level. This forced choice converted passive frustration into active decision-making. People accept change, sure, but they absolutely reject being forced.
Moving to part 2, a crisis of trust. The timing here is crucial because this hardware deadline arrived just as the daily Windows experience itself was deeply deteriorating.
Think about the old Windows. It was predictable, it was trusted. But the new Windows? Our sources describe it as less of an operating system you own and way more of a monetized platform running on your hardware under Microsoft's rules. Users started feeling less like owners of their computers and more like guests on their own machines, essentially paying a subscription they never formally agreed to.
Let's look at exactly what caused this erosion. We are talking about ads popping up right inside the Start menu and File Explorer. We're talking about background telemetry silently collecting your behavioral data, forced Microsoft account requirements, and then came the whole AI push. Copilot being shoved into the interface whether you wanted it or not. And then there's the highly controversial recall feature, which planned to literally screenshot your entire activity history for AI processing. Any single one of these issues might have been tolerated, but together, they form this sort of smoke-filled room of lost privacy. It sent a very clear message. The operating system's primary goal was now monetizing user behavior.
Section 3. Enter Zorin OS. So, where are all these frustrated users going once they decide they've had enough?
Get this, out of nearly 1 million downloads for the new Zorin OS 18, a massive 800,000 came directly from Windows users. That is over 70% of their total downloads. People who had never once considered an alternative suddenly started searching, and what they found waiting for them was Zorin OS, a Linux distribution that caught this massive wave perfectly.
The real secret to Zorin's success lies in its design philosophy, and I love this terminology from our source. Other highly respected Linux systems, like Ubuntu or Fedora, assume the user has some level of curiosity about Linux. Zorin OS, it assumes terror. They assume the person installing it has never seen a command terminal window and absolutely never wants to. They didn't try to convert Windows users to a Linux philosophy, they just met those users exactly where they were standing.
Part 4, Built for Windows Refugees. Let's explore exactly how Zorin OS built this bridge in practice.
When we compare the day-to-day experience, it's night and day. Where Windows 11 pushes heavy telemetry and forced cloud sync, Zorin OS is just structurally different. There are 0 ads, there are no forced accounts, there's absolutely no background data collection feeding a corporate pipeline, and crucially, there's a version called Zorin Lite. By stripping away all that heavy background processing, Zorin Lite revives older hardware that Windows 11 declared obsolete. In fact, users are reporting a wild surprise. Their unsupported machines actually boot faster and feel more responsive on Zorin than they ever did running Windows 10. The computer was never the problem. The heavy operating system was.
And here is where Zorin truly shines for beginners. Historically, the most demoralizing moment of switching to Linux was trying to run a Windows application and just getting slapped with a confusing error message. Not on Zorin. When you drag a windows.exe file onto the system, it doesn't fail silently. It detects the file and actively suggests native Linux alternatives or compatible replacements right from its database. It literally holds your hand through the transition, replacing a moment of failure with a moment of helpful guidance.
Because it's so frictionless, we are seeing a fascinating viral spread. Our sources highlight that this surge isn't coming from tech influencers. No, it's first-time Linux users. And it's actively destroying the old myth that Linux is only for tech experts.
Finally, Part 5, the broad Linux shift, because this migration isn't just an isolated incident, it's part of a much bigger picture.
The mainstream ecosystem in 2025 is categorically different than it was even 5 years ago. In hardware, major players like Dell are actively certifying high-end NPU computers for Linux first, specifically catering to enterprise clients who are really concerned about Microsoft's cloud-heavy, privacy-invasive focus. In software, developers are testing Linux compatibility as a top priority, and in gaming, which, let's face it, used to be Linux's definitive weakness, massive improvement via projects like Proton and the Steam Deck have completely normalized the experience.
So where does this leave Microsoft? Well, they're in a very tight spot. They're trying to respond to this exodus by doubling down on exactly what drove people away in the first place. More AI features, more cloud integration, more subscriptions. Our sources explain that Microsoft is treating this like a product problem, like a gap in features. But users aren't leaving because of a lack of features. They're leaving due to a total lack of trust. And Microsoft cannot fix the trust problem without dismantling their monetization architecture. The ads generate revenue, the telemetry feeds the AI. Turning those off literally means turning off the money.
And that brings us to the core of the whole issue. When a company turns your personal computer into an advertising billboard and issues an ultimatum about your perfectly good hardware, the emotional connection just breaks. Zorin OS didn't just offer an alternative, they offered an escape hatch at the exact moment millions of people realized they were trapped. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. When trust is gone, can a new feature ever bring it back? Because for the hundreds of thousands of everyday users making the great Windows exodus right now, the answer seems to be a resounding no.